Hello, this is Jasmina Heilbrenner. Most people just call me Jazz, but I am the owner of Phi Design LLC. And in this presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of how I do Feng Shui analysis. I'm going to talk about Qi and stars throughout the presentation, so I thought I'd better define them here. Qi is a form of energy, and this energy creates effects in our lives. And after hundreds or even thousands of years of observation, the rules of Feng Shui have been created. Feng Shui began over 3,000 years ago, so that's pretty impressive. What you see here is something called a flying star chart. There are 144 different charts that are in existence, and what your chart will look like, that is where these numbers will be located, will depend on the period of your house and the direction it faces. Once the appropriate chart is found, this chart, this is only an example, but the appropriate chart is placed over your house's floor plan. So if your house is long and narrow, this chart is stretched to create the 9 equal-sized rectangles. If it's long and narrow this way, it's stretched this way the same way. You always end up with 9 equal-sized sectors. And what are the stars? Well, the stars are the numbers. The number on the upper right is called the facing star. On the upper left, it's called the sitting star, and the big number is called the base star. It's the 2 small stars that are actually the more important stars. And the way Feng Shui is applied is that you look at the combination of these 2 small stars in every sector of your house, and this will tell you what kind of energy is located there. And that's basically all you do with flying stars. It's quite easy. But the hard part is making sure you get your period and facing direction correct, and how to interpret it. Why do people bother with Feng Shui? Most of the time it's to eliminate problems. Feng Shui can have an effect in your life in finances, and that's money coming in or going out, and that includes crypto. Health includes physical, mental, and emotional health, and both personal and professional relationships are covered here. Now, I'm in my 60s, and everybody I've ever known who isn't an infant has had some of these problems at some point in their life. But that doesn't mean it's always because of poor Feng Shui. Sometimes problems just happen. When we had the meltdown in the subprime mortgage, that is something that it's hard for an individual to control. We were lucky we didn't get affected by that, but many people did. So this is actually a much better question to ask. That is, when can Feng Shui solve your problems? And the answer is when you have persistent problems that are of a consistent nature. By persistent, we're talking longer than a month. It can be a single problem that lasts longer than a month, or it can be a series of problems. You solve one, another one comes, you solve that, and another one comes, and that goes on for a couple months. And when I mean consistent, I mean it falls into just one of these 3 categories. Now, if you've had problems for a long time, it is possible. Let's say, for example, you have problems with your finances. That can lead to problems with your health and relationships. So sometime we have to look back and see which was the first problem to occur, and then we attack that to cure that problem. And then these other 2 should follow and just clear up on their own. There are certain times when you're more likely to experience problems with Feng Shui. One is moving into a new house, especially if you have not had its Feng Shui analyzed. But you can also have this happen in your current house if you do a very significant remodel. And by this, I mean you've moved rooms around. So your home office, the new one, is not where the old one was. Same thing for the kitchen, it's moved. Same thing for your bedroom, the owner's bedroom, all that kind of thing. This can, because it's located in a different area of your home, it will receive different energy. And that can really make a big difference. You can also accidentally change your period of your house. Now, in general, this is not terribly easy to do, but life circumstances can just make this happen. So this is something to watch out for. Also, sometimes a bad annual star will enter an important area of your house. And if it's not an important area, because there's bad stars every year, there's in certain locations, if they're in your bathroom, you're not going to have any problems. But if they're in your kitchen, you're much more likely to. You could also have woken up some of the annual afflictions. And we're going to talk about this more in the following slides. But this is something you don't want to do, is to annoy these guys. This is something that nobody can avoid. We will soon be entering period 9. It is still period 8 at the time of this recording, but early February 2024, we enter a new period, and so the energy in your house will change. If you're like me, you have and say, well, you know, things aren't going so well. Let me see if these cures from these Feng Shui stores work. Can they work? The answer is maybe. There's a couple of things that can prevent them from working, and I'll discuss them. This is something I have never seen stated on a website that sells Feng Shui cures. And that is about 3/4 of the qi. Remember, that's the energy that Feng Shui works with. 3/4 that is created by your external landforms, nothing to do with your house. Now, these external landforms include mountains and water, which I'll talk about in the next slide. But if you don't have the appropriate landforms, you're going to have weak qi, which will lead to a weak cure. When it comes to mountains, the term mountains in Feng Shui has a much broader definition than the word mountain in English. Of course, it includes mountains, but it also includes hills and higher ground. Now, this higher ground could be so subtle, you actually have to look at a topography map to know which way your ground slopes in your local area, because it can look quite flat and not be flat. It's important that this come from nature, so you cannot just pile a mound of dirt in your backyard and call it a mountain. It simply won't work. When it comes to water, it must be visible water, so that water line from your well or the city water doesn't count. Fortunately, it can be man-made. It's better if it's natural, but as long as there's something you can see, it's good. A bird bath is probably too small, but the water must be kept clean. You want it to be slowly moving and to be quiet. You don't want to live next to a waterfall. And so in general, you also don't want a fountain, unless it's a very quiet fountain. A pond or a swimming pool that has a filter that functions is good. It can keep your water clean, then it's slowly moving. That's basically perfect. The other problem is if your cure is not made out of the right material, it may not work well. I don't use the cures from these stores anymore. I use something called an elemental cure, and I found it actually works better than what I'm calling symbolic cures. That's anything you get from the Feng Shui stores. So those are all those figurines or wind chimes or crystals. And an elemental cure works in a fundamentally different manner. It's not symbolizing anything. It actually works in a more fundamental way. A elemental cure uses the weakening cycle of the 5 elements. These 5 elements are common to all of Chinese metaphysics. And the cycle, the growth cycle, the weakening cycle, and the destructive or controlling cycle are common to all of Chinese metaphysics. So the way an elemental cure works is you place objects made out of an element that weakens the element of a bad star. I'm going to give an example because I'm sure it will make it much clearer. At the time of this recording, we are still in period 8, and in period 8, the number 2 and the number 5, especially the 5, are by far the worst stars in the flying star chart. They both happen to be Earth element stars. So if we look at this controlling cycle, what points towards Earth? It is metal. So metal is the cure. So you place objects made out of metal in an area of your home where you have a 2 or 5 in the two small numbers of your natal chart, your flying star chart, or when the annual star 2 or 5 enters a particular area. You need a fair amount of mass or weight. For a single bad star, you need about 50 to 60 pounds. But if you happen to be unlucky and have an annual star 5 enter an area where you already have a 5, you're going to need at least twice that amount. And the good thing is this can be in multiple items. So you don't need just one big object. It can be as many objects as you need to create that total mass. Now, the best thing I like about elemental cures is you do not need to change your design style. You don't have to have any garish Feng Shui critters, figurines, or whatever all over the place. Nobody has to know you're doing Feng Shui. They can just be jealous of your good luck. That's what I like about elemental cures the most. Now, the placement in this case of metal is best done in specific date ranges to get its full effect. And what date ranges those are will depend on the facing direction of your house. And can't really say more because it's very complicated. If you choose to do a Feng Shui analysis with me, I will include the analysis of your external landforms, because if I didn't, I wouldn't even be doing half the job that needs to be done. And if someone says they can do it without it, they aren't as educated as they perhaps should be to give you good results. So I'm going to talk about my qualifications. I started studying Feng Shui over 20 years ago. Not all of that 20 plus years has been intensive study. Only maybe 6 to maybe 8 years has been intensive. The rest of the time I have used for observation and also just trying to analyze what I have seen. At the time when I started this, Feng Shui wasn't really hot. And the charts that I use for the flying stars, the purple, white, all this stuff, I have done myself. Way back, 20 plus years ago, I started with the flying star system, and I used the book by Eva Wong to be able to create those charts. Since then, I've used at least these 3 authors, books by these 3 authors, to create my other charts. And I actually trust them over a computer, because these charts that don't change, they're very consistent. They have a lot of mathematical consistency in them. I know that they're done right, and I have checked with several other sites to know they're done right, but I don't have to pay for it, and I know they're right. So this is why I use them. When it comes to my interpretation of the charts, I use everybody's book that's listed here. I also read the blogs of David Yeck. He is very deep, and you actually already have to know a fair amount about Feng Shui to truly understand his blogs. But if you do, they really can deepen your understanding. So like most people, I started with the flying star system. And at that time, like I said, there was no place to get your Flying Star chart for free. So I found the book by Eva Wong that describes how you create them. And I created all 144 charts by hand and put that information into a Word file. And I still use that Word file today. I've added to it, but the base started 20 plus years ago. You note I say single family homes, and this is the most appropriate place to use the Flying Star system. When apartments and condos became more common, they tried to apply the Flying Star system to these apartments, and they didn't find them to be particularly accurate. And so they sought to understand what was going on. And they particularly failed in describing the difference between people living one floor above another and above another and that kind of thing. And in apartments, almost always, from one floor to another, the apartments that are stacked one on top of another are identical physically. They might have differences in colors or stuff like this, but physically, and that's the important thing in the Flying Star system, they're the same. So they decided they need to develop something else. And what they developed was the purple-white replacement chart system. These replacement charts take into account what floor you live on and where your door is located. And this is the system I use for apartments and condos. For single-family homes, I use primarily the Flying Star chart. A single-family home does have a purple-white chart, and it can be used, but it's basically secondary. Most apartments, their purple-white chart will vary quite a bit from year to year. And so your luck may vary quite a bit from year to year if you're living in an apartment or a condo. There are a small number of apartments or condos that have consistently good charts from year to year, but they're pretty rare. There's also Qi Men Feng Shui. It is different. These two systems have stars. This system has energies in the various sectors of your home. What this means is a couple things. One, it can make a so-so area good. For example, if you have a bedroom that has so-so stars, they're okay, they're not great, they're not awful. But in that area of your house, the Qi Men Feng Shui chart says you have the harmony spirit in that area. That's great. Your relationships with everybody will improve over time. So that's good. It can make a good area not quite so good, but it only takes a little bit of care to make sure that it doesn't deteriorate the situation. And that's because these two are much more powerful, not so much more powerful, but act much more faster. So you can curtail some of the bad places in these charts if you know what you're doing. There is also Shuan Kong Feng Shui, which works in a different way. It's not really concerned with what's inside your house. It actually cares more about landforms and the directions those landforms are located with respect to your main door, usually your front door. And it doesn't really care what's inside, and it is different in certain ways. Every period, you will have some really powerful directions. But they change when we change period, they change directions. Working facing that direction or sleeping with your headboard pointed in that direction lets you tap into that really good energy. Working is much better, a lot better than sleeping in that direction. But if you work in an office, sometimes you can't change the direction you're facing when you're working. So then your only option is to sleep with your head pointed in that direction. And if that's all you have, it's still worth it. But if you can do any work at home and work facing that direction, it's better. And of course, I would tell you that direction when we work together. I promised to talk about the annual afflictions. I call them the Grand Duke Gang. There's a Tai Soi, who is the Grand Duke. There's a Soibo, which is opposite the Grand Duke and is really only important for certain people, certain years. There's the 5 Yellow, which is quite bad. And then there are the 3 Killings. Now, these are external. Well, actually, this one has to do with the annual star, but they come from the outside. There's nothing, it doesn't matter what direction your house faces. They occupy certain directions on the compass, and they change every year. And the best thing to do for these guys is not to disturb them. So no continuous loud noises, certainly nothing that actually you can feel the vibration. You don't want to do any kind of construction. You don't even want to nail a nail into the wall. That can be enough to activate one of these guys. And then you'll have problems for the rest of the year. Now, there are times of the year that if you have to do something in those areas, it can happen. But it's best if you can wait. So I'm going to talk a bit more about annual charts. I will give full credit to the Feng Shui websites that do tell you exactly what happens in every sector of your home, what affects the given star that enters there will have. But what they don't do is they don't tell you how they interact with your natal chart. So we are really only talking about single family homes because they have a natal chart. And the annual chart is part of the purple white system, so it has no effect on apartments or condos. But I'm going to give you an example. Let's say you have a home office, and this is in that area where your home office is. This is what your natal chart has. These are the stars there. And this is actually pretty good for a home office. But when the annual star 9 enters this sector of your house, it becomes a much, much more powerful area. And this annual star only comes around once every 9 years, so it's best not to miss it. But that year, when the annual star 9 enters there, it's a very good year to start something big. You don't have to finish it in that year, but you want to start it that year, because if you do, your chances of success are greatly improved. And what I mean by starting something big, I mean something like starting a side gig, especially if you've been thinking about one for a while. You can make your side gig your full-time job if you've been thinking about it. You can start on an advanced degree in college or learn a new language or skill that will help you either with your side gig or your full-time job. Or you can research something important. And I'll give you one example. Let's say you're trying to become pregnant and you're having trouble, so you decide you need to look into fertility research, find out what's out there. You want to do that and look for your local doctor and even call to set up an appointment while you are in this room. Anything that you can do that is associated with this, so that's paperwork, planning, that you can do for your side gig, any studying you want to do in that room, and any research on whatever topic, you need to do it in that room, because that's the room that has the really good energy. So that's what is meant by taking advantage, real advantage, of the annual charts. And this is something that would be very hard for a store that sells feng shui cures to do, because they would have to analyze your home for you, and they won't do that, that's for sure. I also take into account a person's personal 8 mansions. Your house also has an 8 mansions formation, which I do not use, and I really don't know any masters who do, because it doesn't seem to work, and in my personal experience it also doesn't work. But the personal 8 mansions is based on your time of birth and what gender you are. And there are calculators out there, and I will actually have a separate presentation about this because this is something that can be a little tricky. When you are looking for a new house, especially, use your personal 8 mansions to help you find a house that has a good facing direction and a good main door facing direction. And in my personal experience, when you get at least one of those right, the house is actually quite good. And this is true of apartments too. Either one is fine. And there's other ways to use it. Even if you have an existing house and you're not planning on moving, I do hope that at least one of those, either your facing direction or your main door's facing direction, is a good direction for you. But there's other ways to use it. In your home office, if your desk is facing in one of your good directions, that's great. In the kitchen, if your range is facing a good direction for you, that's great. Now, there's actually quite a bit of requirements about the kitchen range, and I actually have a separate video that talks just about the range. When it comes to the bedroom, we're talking about the direction of the headboard. And the way that's defined is you stand at the foot of your bed, looking towards the headboard. What direction are you facing? That's how that is defined. So these things can be adjusted in any house. And this is why these are actually quite useful. There are many couples where one person is an East Group person and the other one is a West Group person. And what that means is the East Group's person's good direction is a bad direction for the West Group person and vice versa. So that can make designing a house a little more challenging, but this right here, the desk, is usually where you get the best bang for your buck because you can place the facing direction of the desk for individuals. Also, if you can get a main door in the facing direction, a good facing direction for one person, and the house facing in a good direction for the other person, then you meet the requirement for both. And so this is doable. This isn't terribly difficult to deal with. And I will have a separate video about this, and this is where I'll actually give you a couple examples. I also know how to look at chi flow and do chi manipulation, which is a way of getting good energy from your main door into the important rooms of your house. And these are basically the important rooms. If your kids do all their studying on your dining room table, then that's the only time your dining room becomes important. If you have your home office where your guest bedroom is, that's the only time a guest bedroom becomes important. But the way chi flow and chi manipulation work is by using the growth and controlling cycles of the 5 elements. I didn't show you the controlling thing, but you can Google this. This is everywhere. This information is everywhere now if you really want to know. There are also many special formations. There are actually too numerous to mention all of them, but there are plenty. And I'm going to talk about in more detail these in the next few slides. If your house has a definitive facing direction, and I'm not going to describe that in great detail, I can use everything. But there are houses that don't have definitive facing directions. And we have 360 degrees in our compass. And there are about 4% of those positions that aren't in, if your house faces one of those directions, you got about 4% chance that your house does not have a definitive facing direction. This is especially true if the roads in your area follow a lake shore or a river. Then there are likely stretches where the houses don't have good or definitive facing directions. If the town that you're living in is laid out in a north, south, east, west road grid, then most of the homes have definitive facing directions. So it depends. If you do not have a definitive facing direction, most of this stuff goes away. I can only use these, or I can only concerned about these 4 things. And this one isn't a good thing. So you've only got 3 positive things to work with. So in general, unless you're living, if you happen to find out you're living in a house without a definitive facing direction, unless you're already having really good luck in that house, which probably means you won't be contacting me, I wouldn't stay there. I would find a place to move. But you do want to check out the new house too with Feng Shui. You don't just want to move, because you might end up moving to another bad place. But this is something to be concerned about. But only 4% of houses in terms of direction have to worry about this. Now, I promised to talk about special formations. There are plenty more than what I list here, but the reason why I'm focusing on these 6, is because so long as you have a definitive facing direction, your house has a possibility of having one of these good formations. I'm not going to talk in great deal about what they look like. If you want to read more about it, you can go to this website. At last check, it's free. They do request a cryptocurrency donation, and if you do crypto, by all means, please use them. If you type special formations in their search engine, the first thing that should come up is 8 special formations. The extra 2 are subformations of number 3. I just want you to know that if you're reading somewhere and you see the term combo 3, that's the same thing as the parent string formation. And in fact, Eva Wong uses the term combo 3. I happen to call the 7-star robbery formation the 3-cycle formation because it's informative and it doesn't have the word robbery in it, because people tend to freak out when they hear that. So I call it the 3-cycle formation. I don't think anybody else does. But again, you must have a definitive facing direction for this to work. In order to understand how these formations, these good formations work, there's a couple things you need to understand. One is the concept of timely versus untimely stars. So all stars, that's all numbers, have good aspects and bad. If a star is timely, you feel the good. If it's untimely, you feel the bad. And what is timely and untimely will depend on the period of time in which we are currently living. The number 2 is what I like to call a Jekyll and Hyde star. If you've gone to Feng Shui stores, you usually hear the 2 listed as the illness star. And indeed, when star 2 is untimely, it tends to lead to illness. However, when the star is timely, it tends to lead to wealth. And once we reach period 9, star 2 goes from untimely to timely. So we have a very interesting period coming up now. One thing that you'll have to understand too is that all of these special formations must be what they call activated. So that means they must meet certain requirements. And exactly what requirements need to be met depend upon the form itself. And so I'm not going to go into any great detail, but what I can say is that there are basically 3 classifications of requirements. Some are physical requirements of the house itself. Some are temporal, when can the formation be activated? And the external landforms are probably the most important. There are a couple forms that are either made or broken by the presence or absence of external landforms. And all the rest, if they're not broken by missing them, they are greatly enhanced by having them. So what do these actual formations do? Well, these 3 are by far, everybody agrees, they're the best group. They make all stars become timely for all periods, and that's because they're borrowing energy from all periods. And if you happen to be lucky enough to have one of these houses and the formation has already been activated, you want to be really careful that you don't change the period of your house, because I can almost guarantee you will destroy this formation. There are occasions when you won't, but most of the time you will. There's actually a fair amount of controversy about the pearl string formation. Some believe that it's as good as these three, that is, all stars become timely for all periods. Others believe that this formation is only this good when the center's base star is timely. And that center's base star is that big number in the center box of your flying star chart. I have a feeling it lies somewhere in between the two, because the people that are doing this have a lot of experience. So I figure that it's probably best if the center space star is timely, but it's better than not having it even when the center space star is not timely. It's just not quite as good. Now these last two, even though they don't have an overall effect on the house, they are actually still really good formations, because they create two good sectors, and it's really important to have your most important rooms in those two sectors, but those two sectors are super powerful. So it's still worth having this. So I'm going to talk about activation here, and I'm really only going to talk about timing on this slide. These two formations are quite good. They're really good if you can activate them, and they're nice that they can be activated at any point in time. As long as you met the other requirements for these two, you can do it. The pearl string formation, again, we still have this controversy exactly when we should activate it and how good it will be. My intuition tells me that if you do activate this formation when the center's base star is timely, that good energy will continue. However, I don't know for sure. And if you live in a pearl string house, if you're lucky enough to live in one, I am going to do at least a few pearl string houses for free so that I can test this and can figure out who is right. These three are quite rare. The 3-cycle formation is a lot more common, but it has some strict time requirements that if you miss the window, you have to wait a long time before you can activate them. Remember, there are 144 different charts. Only 16 of those charts are combo 10s. Only 10 are parent string and only 10 are pearl string. But over half the charts have the right star formations to become a 3-cycle house. However, these strict time requirements knock out many of those at any given time or any given period. But we have a very interesting period coming up in period 9. All houses that have a definitive facing direction have some form of this 3-cycle formation. Some are more powerful than others, but every house has it. If you happen to have one of these formations already, and even the up mountain, down water, or on mountain, up mountain, down water, or on mountain, on water, you don't need to change, especially if they're already activated, because it's good. You don't have to worry about it, because these are equally good. But if you don't have it, then you may want to consider this. Again, the house must have a definitive facing direction, and there are some pretty strict physical requirements in the house's layout inside the house and it's linked to outside that must be met. So sometimes this can be expensive. Sometimes you may already have it. It depends on your situation. But if you have it or can afford to make the changes that are needed, and you do not have one of the other special formations, then what you do is you deliberately change the period of your house. Now, if you have a new house built in period 9, you'll have a period 9 house. If you have a house that's like a bit over 120 years old, you also have a period 9 house. And we're talking about this date here. The easiest way to deliberately change the period of your house is be out of your house continuously for 4 months. That almost perfectly ensures it. And you can rent an apartment for 4 months. Usually it has to be monthly, but it has to have at least 100 consecutive days when nobody's living there, where nobody's even inside the house. That's the best. And that is something that is worth doing if you already don't have a good formation. But you don't need to do this if you do already have a good formation. I don't want everybody doing this. There are a lot of people that can tweak something, and they'll actually be able to do this, and they won't have to meet all these special requirements. Now again, once you've done this and activated this 3-cycle formation, you want to make sure you don't accidentally change the period of your house afterwards, because you'll almost certainly destroy this formation. These last two, if you have them, they're very good, but they are completely dependent upon landforms. So there are some strict requirements of where you must have water and mountains. Now the mountains have to come from nature, so there's nothing you can do. You can place water in wherever you need it, but the mountains have to come from nature. So if the ground next to your house falls away, that is, it slopes away from your house in a direction where you need a mountain, and you cannot see a mountain or a hill in the distance, you simply can't activate these forms. So this is the ones that are totally dependent on external landforms. And in general, it is probably true that when you want to activate these, and that's usually by adding water, because that's less common, it's when the center space star, that big number in the center box, is timely. If you are interested in working with me, all meetings can occur online, so I can work anywhere in the world, so long as we have a mutual language. And I can work in metric or imperial, I don't care. I'm totally fine with both. I need a fair amount of information about your house and who lives there. And if you express an interest by emailing me, I will send you a form so that you can fill that out. I can't really give a quote right now because it depends on too many things. But once you fill this out, I can give you a quote, and then you can decide whether or not you want to move forward. I also want you to know that I have a degree in interior design, and there are a lot of skills that come with interior design. My strongest skill, and it just comes naturally to me, is something called space planning. You can Google that if you like. But what that means is the flow and the feel of the space is very important to me. And I don't like designing spaces that feel weird or cramped or just don't function well. So if there happens to be any remodeling recommendations, and many times there are not any, but if there are, you will still have a space that's functional and enjoyable to use, because this is important to me, and there is enough flexibility in Feng Shui that this can happen. I also want you to know that I have successfully created building plans that have received a building permit, and that house is being built right now, and actually I am doing a lot of the building myself, and it is hard, but it is also very rewarding. But this means that I know what can be done and what can't be done in all aspects, even in terms of how hard or easy it is to build something. So I'm not going to give you plans that are so crazy that the people you hire to do these changes go, I can't do this. That won't happen, because these will be things that are well within the possibility of what can be done. They won't be strange. So I'd like to thank you for watching. I know this was a long presentation. Please feel free to contact me at this website. No, I'm sorry, at this email address if you're interested in a Feng Shui analysis or have some questions. When you have questions, this will help me produce a frequently asked question page. So I'm not going to put you on an emailing list just because you email me to ask a question. I know this is counterintuitive to what they say you should do in a business, but I really hate that when other companies do that, so I'm not going to do that to you. I hope that you will remember me, but if you don't, well, I can live with that too. So, please feel free to contact me. Again, I'd like to thank you for watching.